It's 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the river valleys of China. You step into the forest, and there it is, 300 pounds of muscle, bad temper, and curved tusks staring directly at you. This is a wild boar. It has a reinforced shoulder plate, essentially a built-in suit of armor it evolved specifically for headbutting other boars into submission. It can charge without warning, and it is infuriatingly fast, in a way that feels deeply unfair for something that size. Your options at this exact moment are extremely limited. Run, climb something, pray to whatever you pray to. This animal was not a pet. This animal was a threat with legs. And yet, somehow, without a single human ever sitting down and deciding this was a good idea, that exact animal became the pig. One of the most eaten animals in human history, found on every continent except Antarctica. So genetically similar to humans that surgeons are currently putting pig hearts inside actual human bodies. Wild boar to bacon. Complete accident. Here's how it happened. Before we get into the mechanics, there's a piece of evidence from a study published in 2025 that finally proves, in genuinely unpleasant detail, exactly how that first contact between humans and wild boars played out. It involves looking inside 8,000-year-old pig teeth. What researchers found in there is one of the more unexpected things in the entire history of this niche. We'll get there. First, the world these animals were living in. Around 10,000 years ago, something enormous was changing in how humans lived. For most of our history, we'd been nomadic, following food, never staying anywhere long enough to build anything permanent. But in certain parts of the world, in the river valleys of China and the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East, humans started settling down, growing crops, building the first permanent settlements. And here's what nobody mentions when they talk about early farming villages. They were absolutely filthy. Not by choice, just by logic. You put dozens of people in one place with no waste management, grain stores, food scraps, cooking fires, and slaughter areas, and you've accidentally built the most attractive buffet in the entire forest. Wild boars are opportunistic feeders. They will eat almost anything that isn't actively trying to kill them first. So they showed up, not because humans invited them, because humans had, completely unintentionally, created the single best food source in the region, and the wild boars found it. Here's where it gets interesting. Not all wild boars are equally aggressive. Some are bolder, less skittish around humans. Some are more cautious, more likely to bolt at the first sign of movement. In a purely natural setting, that personality variation barely matters. But the moment wild boars started lingering near human settlements, it mattered enormously. The aggressive ones that got too close got speared. The skittish ones that stayed too far away never got any food. But the ones in the middle, the ones calm enough to hang around without threatening anyone, those animals ate well. And they came back. And they had offspring. And those offspring inherited whatever genetic quirk made their parents slightly less aggressive than the average wild boar. This is what researchers call the commensal pathway to domestication. The animal isn't recruited by humans, it recruits itself, by showing up somewhere useful and being just friendly enough to survive doing it. This is exactly what happened with cats and grain stores. It's exactly what happened with wolves at the edge of human camps, which we covered in an earlier video. And it's exactly what happened with wild boars in those first Neolithic settlements in China and the Middle East, simultaneously, with zero contact between those two regions. Two completely separate accidents producing the same result. There's a strange kind of symmetry worth noticing in how this story keeps repeating itself across different species we've already covered. Wolves became dogs through scavenging at the edge of firelight. Pigs became, well, pigs through scavenging at the edge of farming villages. In both cases, the animal that succeeded wasn't the boldest or the most dominant. It was the one calm enough to tolerate humans without provoking them, generation after generation, until tolerance quietly became partnership. Evolution, in these stories, didn't reward strength or aggression at all. It rewarded patience. It rewarded whichever animal was willing to sit at the edge of human mess and simply wait. There's also a question worth asking before we move on. If pigs essentially domesticated themselves twice, independently, in two unconnected regions of the ancient world, why hasn't it happened again somewhere else, with some other opportunistic scavenger in the thousands of years since? The honest answer is that it actually has, repeatedly, just with less dramatic results. Plenty of animal species have attempted the exact same commensal strategy near human settlements throughout history, lingering at the edges, scavenging waste, tolerating proximity. Most of them never crossed the threshold into full domestication, either because humans actively eliminated them as pests, or because the animal's biology simply wasn't compatible with selective breeding the way pigs, wolves, and a handful of others happen to be. Rats, for instance, mastered the exact same commensal lifestyle around human settlements just as thoroughly as pigs did. They just never offered humans a comparable benefit worth actively encouraging, so the relationship stalled out at tolerated pest rather than advancing to domesticated partner. Domestication, it turns out, required not just an animal willing to show up. It required one whose presence happened to solve a problem humans actually needed solved. Now here's the 2025 study. A team of researchers from Dartmouth analyzed dental calculus, which is basically ancient dental plaque, from 8,000-year-old pig specimens found at 2 sites in China's lower Yangtze River region. They were trying to figure out what these animals had actually been eating, and what they found confirmed everything. Cooked rice, yams, an unidentified tuber, acorns, wild grasses, all food that was present in human settlements at the time. And here's the thing, pigs don't cook rice. Pigs don't grow yams. The only way those microscopic food particles end up embedded in an 8,000-year-old pig's teeth is if that pig was regularly eating food that came directly from humans. But that wasn't even the most striking part of the discovery. In 16 of the pig specimens, researchers found something else preserved in the dental calculus: whipworm eggs. Specifically a parasite called trichuris, whose eggs can only mature inside a human digestive system. These pigs were eating human waste, not occasionally, consistently enough that the evidence survived 8,000 years in the fossil record. These animals were living so close to humans, so thoroughly integrated into the edges of human settlement, that they had essentially become the village sanitation system. Functioning toilets with legs and an extremely good sense of smell. Nobody planned that. Nobody sat down and said, let's domesticate the boar by feeding it our garbage, and occasionally, worse than garbage. The boar just kept showing up. And at some point, humans started managing the situation rather than simply tolerating it. Once you understand what wild boars were actually doing in those early settlements, the benefit to humans becomes obvious. Waste disposal. In a Neolithic village with zero sanitation infrastructure, having an animal that eats food scraps, garbage, and human waste isn't a small convenience. It's a genuine public health function. Pigs were keeping settlements cleaner and reducing disease risk long before any human consciously understood why that mattered. Then there's the food angle, which developed almost as a side effect. Pigs reproduce quickly, eat nearly anything, grow fast, and provide an enormous amount of meat relative to their size. Once humans started managing pigs more deliberately, keeping certain animals, culling others, gradually influencing which ones bred, they had built an incredibly efficient protein source that essentially fed itself using nothing but leftovers. The relationship also became something more than purely transactional, surprisingly fast. Archaeological evidence from multiple Neolithic sites in China shows pigs buried inside human graves. Not eaten. Not sacrificed in any identifiable ritual context, buried. At the Xinglongwa site in northeast China, pig remains have been found placed within human burials in patterns that closely mirror how other ancient cultures buried companion animals. People were putting pigs in the ground with their dead. That tells you the relationship had become something the living genuinely felt mattered, something closer to grief than to bookkeeping. Here's something that makes the pig story even stranger. The same animal that became one of humanity's most widely eaten meats also became, in several major world religions, one of the most strictly forbidden. Both Judaism and Islam developed explicit religious prohibitions against eating pork, dietary laws that have remained remarkably stable for thousands of years across enormous geographic and cultural distances. Historians and anthropologists have proposed several overlapping explanations. Pigs require relatively damp, shaded environments and don't thermoregulate well in hot, arid climates, making them genuinely impractical livestock across much of the ancient Middle East compared to sheep, goats, or cattle, which tolerate heat and mobility far better. Pigs also compete directly with humans for the same food, grains, tubers, and scraps, rather than grazing on land humans can't otherwise use, making them a comparatively expensive animal to maintain in resource-scarce environments. Whatever the original practical reasoning, the prohibition eventually became something far more powerful than agricultural logic. It became identity. Refusing pork wasn't simply a dietary choice, it became one of the clearest, most consistent markers separating one religious and cultural group from its neighbors, reinforced generation after generation, long after the original environmental reasoning might have applied. Meanwhile, in large parts of East Asia, the exact opposite cultural relationship developed. In China specifically, the same region where pig domestication likely began, pork became so deeply central to daily life that the written Chinese character for home or family literally combines the symbol for a roof with the symbol for a pig underneath it. The animal wasn't simply tolerated, it became, quite literally, baked into the written concept of home itself. The same species, domesticated from the exact same wild ancestor, ended up simultaneously sacred and central in one part of the world and strictly forbidden in another, depending entirely on which humans happened to encounter it, under which specific environmental and cultural conditions thousands of years ago. Domestication is never free, and what happened to pigs over the following 10,000 years of human management is one of the more extreme examples of what selective breeding can actually do to an animal's body. The wild boar that started this entire story was lean, fast, muscular, and built for genuine survival. Thick protective skin, a reinforced cardiovascular system, a natural resistance to stress that let it function in a world full of predators and rivals. Its domestic descendant has been bred so aggressively for weight gain and fat content that many commercial pigs today have cardiovascular systems that genuinely struggle under their own body mass. Wild boars have a reinforced heart and relatively small adrenal glands for their size, a stress-resilient profile built for a life of constant physical activity and constant threat. Studies comparing wild boar and domestic pig physiology have found measurable structural changes in the domestic pig's heart, a system now optimized for rapid weight gain rather than for longevity or resilience. The tusks are smaller or removed entirely. The legs are shorter. The snout looks different. The fur is mostly gone. Most commercial breeds today look almost nothing like the animal this entire story started with, and yet the wildness keeps surfacing anyway. Pigs root obsessively, even on flat concrete floors with nothing underneath to dig for, because their ancestor used that long snout to search for food buried in forest soil for millions of years, and that instinct didn't get the memo that the forest is gone. They are, by a wide margin, among the most intelligent domestic animals on the planet, with problem-solving ability comparable to dogs, and in some tests, measurably better. That intelligence came directly from the wild boar, an animal that genuinely needed it to survive constant threats and outsmart predators. The domestic pig inherited that brain without inheriting the environment the brain was actually built for. When you see a modern pig pushing relentlessly at the edge of its enclosure, or investigating absolutely everything within reach with that same curious nose, you are, in a very real sense, watching a wild boar look for something, anything, to do with a mind that was never designed for a small pen. Here's what genuinely stays with me about this particular story. The lead author of that 2025 Dartmouth study, an anthropologist named Jia-Jing Wang, made a point that's worth sitting with. The evidence suggests these wild boars were probably drawn toward human settlements specifically because people had started settling down and growing food in one place. The settlements created waste. The waste attracted scavengers, and that, entirely by accident, created the exact conditions where animals willing to tolerate living near humans simply survived better than animals that weren't. Nobody designed that outcome. No human ever looked at a wild boar and consciously saw a future pig. The pig emerged from a set of circumstances that humans created, without understanding the consequences, exploited by an animal that had no idea what it was walking into either. And then, at Xinglonghua in northeast China, roughly 8,000 years ago, someone died. And whoever buried them decided it mattered that a pig went into the ground with them. We don't know anything about that person's life. We don't know the specific nature of their relationship with that particular animal. We only know that at the moment of burial, when the people left behind were deciding what this person needed to take with them into whatever came next, a pig was the answer. That's an extraordinarily long way to travel from a wild boar eating garbage at the edge of a settlement. So here's how this actually ends. Pigs didn't happen because anyone had a plan. They happened because humans settled down, made an enormous mess, and a wild boar with slightly lower than average aggression decided that mess was worth eating anyway. And then another one did the same thing. And then 1,000 years passed. And then 10,000. And somewhere across that enormous span of time, without ceremony, without intention, without a single decision anyone could point to, the wild boar became the pig. Today, there are roughly 1 billion pigs on Earth. They are so physiologically similar to humans that their hearts and kidneys are currently being transplanted into human patients as a partial solution to a worldwide organ donor shortage. The animal that started its relationship with us as an unofficial sanitation worker on the edge of a Neolithic village has ended up, quite literally, inside human bodies. It's worth pausing on just how strange the xenotransplantation detail actually is, because it didn't happen by accident the way domestication did. Pigs share an unusually high degree of organ size and physiological similarity with humans, close enough that for decades, before anyone seriously considered pig-to-human transplants, pig heart valves were already being used to repair damaged human hearts, a practice that's been quietly saving lives since the 1960s. The more recent development goes much further. In 2022, and again in subsequent years, surgeons performed the first genetically modified pig heart transplants into living human patients, a procedure that would have sounded like pure science fiction to literally everyone involved in this story up to that point. The pig hearts used in these procedures come from animals that have been genetically edited specifically to reduce the chance of human immune rejection. Engineering layered on top of 10,000 years of accidental domestication. There's something almost poetic, in a slightly unsettling way, about an animal that began its relationship with humans as an unofficial garbage disposal system at the edge of a Neolithic village, ending up as a literal replacement part for a failing human organ. The wild boar that charged at anyone who got too close has become, through 10 millennia of accumulated accident and intention, one of the closest biological matches to ourselves that we have access to. The first pig had no idea it was making history. The first human who tolerated its presence had no idea either. That's what accidental domestication actually looks like. Not a discovery, just two species finding each other quietly useful across thousands of years until neither one could particularly imagine getting along without the other.